our first category is biggest gaffe.
Oh, this has, in British politics, I'm afraid, sorry, Sunak, this has to go to Rishi Sunak.
Well, which one? There's so many.
For really his
from.
entire election campaign. But I think we can summarise it as announcing the election campaign in pouring rain with no umbrella.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future. To decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty.
I can remember watching it on the screen, my jaw on the floor. I thought, no, someone's going to put him out of his misery. Someone's going to bring him an umbrella. And he got wetter and wetter and wetter. And you knew from that moment he was doomed. It was all over.
Yes, for me, it's the D-Day day when Rishi Sunak had this huge opportunity to go to the European stage, proclaim his patriotism, bring people together, and he decided instead to leave early and go home.
Having fully participated in all the British events with British veterans, I returned home before the International Leaders event. That was a mistake, and I apologise for that.
I mean, the whole campaign was the biggest gaffe, I think, and that was the problem. I think there were so many people who thought at the time, because I remember speaking to many people and they said they've known they were going to do this. They must have been ready. And then it was just day after day. It fell slowly.
I'm going to give you another one.
After Horlicks.
Well, the announcement at the site of the Titanic.
Yes.
And then trying to feed the goats, or the poor little goats wouldn't even agree with Rishi.
There were so many, but you're right about the Titanic. Here we are going to relaunch our campaign. Prime Minister, what is that behind you? It's the Titanic. And you remember we went to Wales and asked the Welsh how they're going to get on in the football tournament when they had no team playing.
It was so bad.
And I mean, Freddie's point about the D-Day one is an important one because, of course, he let Keir Starmer then, stride onto the world stage alongside Macron and Zelensky and all the rest of it. And what was he coming back for? He was coming back for a completely unmemorable and not particularly friendly interview with Paul Brand of ITV. Yeah,
absolute gaffe-prone campaign. What do we think Labour's worst gaffe is?
Certainly Labour's funniest gaffe. I know, I'm sorry, this is tasteless in many ways, is when Keir Starmer had his best sort of serious furrowed frown face on at the Labour Party conference and said, and the other thing is we absolutely demand the immediate return of the sausages.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
I mean, hostages. And I'm sorry, it was just incredibly funny.
This made it across the Atlantic. This is the first time people went, I think your Prime Minister messed up the other day. That cut through. It got cut through in Washington.
But it's weird because I remember being at conference and in the room where the media had gathered, and I didn't hear it the first time. And I remember coming out and we were about to record a podcast, Andrew, weren't we? And then my phone's going, sausages. What are people talking about?
It was because it was so serious, because it was so heartbreaking, because he was being so serious about it, that it was so funny.
No, it was funny. It was funny. Right.
Sorry, Keir.
Unlikeliest friendship. Now, generally this year we've seen some very odd things happening, haven't we? People jumping into political bed of most unlikely fellows. Natalie Elphicke being opened with welcome arms by the Labour Party, for example. What's your most unlikely friendship of 2024?
I kind of think it has to go to David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, for his bromance with J.D. Vance, which I think none of us saw coming. The things that he had said about the Trump campaign and Trump in the past, but his way back into the world of Trump was through J.D. Vance.
Is there much of a bromance there?
Well, we keep being told there is, and they got on very, very well indeed. And I think it's around the fact they were both brought up in fatherless families. They both had a very rough time. David Lammy had read Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, and was much struck by it. So there is something going on there, and it is very unlikely. And, of course, it led then to this dinner where Trump had David Lammy and Keir Starmer for dinner. And Keir Starmer said...
Not literally.
Well, that's still to come. Well spotted, that's still to come. But no, he according to Keir Starmer, very graciously himself offered them seconds. And it does feel a bit kind of cringe-making from a British point of view, but nonetheless, few things are weirder than that, except possibly Trump and the heir to the throne meeting in Paris at the Notre Dame.
Oh, Wales. Yeah, they seemed to get on really well, didn't they?
And Trump said, he's a good one, this one, I think, suggesting strongly, handsome, he's a good one, suggesting perhaps that another one, brackets Harry, brackets, isn't a good one. But that was interesting.
I think it was the same week that Trump and Starmer had that dinner, you had this very strange, flirtatious exchange between Elon Musk and Giorgia Meloni at the UN General Assembly week. Musk, I think Georgia Meloni was having a prize awarded to, and she nominated Elon Musk to stand up and give her this award. It was very strange, and that's continued, I think, and they've spent many times together in Rome. And
in what way was it flirtatious? How does a billionaire woo the ladies?
You got to see the photos, Hannah. But yeah, no, there's definitely something there, and they've been both quite explicit about their shared adoration for one another.
Okay, well, my nominee, I just want to give a shout out to Ed Davey. During the election campaign,
he couldn't see a paddleboard he didn't adore. He couldn't see a big wheel he didn't fall in love with. He couldn't see an inflatable he didn't want to clamber on.
Do you not think it degrades the political debate? Do you not think it makes them look unserious?
Can I just point out,
is it an insult to the British people?
Ed Davey put on a Christmas jersey and did a Christmas song and looked more convincing, may I say, Hannah, than you do.
Convincing as what?
A sort of Christmassy kind of enthusiast.
Biggest U-turn. Well, we've got plenty to choose from. Freddie.
The most important one, I think, was when Nigel Farage said he wasn't going to stand and changed his mind. I remember your column at the time, Andrew, said like this was the biggest moment of the campaign, and it was, and it's proved to be since Reform are now doing so well in the polls.
10 days between those two.
Yeah, I mean, Nigel Farage came out and he said, right at the start of the campaign, my focus this year is on America. He said he almost implied, well, he did imply that it's much more important than what happens in the UK. And
shall I read you back what he said? The US election matters more to us than the UK election.
Not the most patriotic sentiment that he could have expressed. And then he said he was sort of dragged to the forefront of politics again by all these people clamouring for his return, and he did it. He didn't give in. So that was the biggest U-turn for me.
That presser where with
Tice.
Wow. The body language. They clearly, I mean...
They're not best friends, are they, really?
It was really awkward to watch.
Yeah.
Well, it's humiliating for Tice, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally. But it was awkward. Andrew?
Can I just point, it's a slightly boring answer, but everybody in the Conservative Party and everybody on the Conservative side of politics and almost everybody in business would say that imposing national insurance contributions on business was a big U-turn, given that it didn't explicitly say in the manifesto that business was going to be excluded, employers were going to be excluded. That has had quite an economic impact already. So in sort of serious way, that would be a really big one. In less serious news, I suppose, could you argue that the row over spectacles and stuff was a U-turn? Not really. He never said he wouldn't.
They said they wouldn't do it anymore.
No.
I mean, I've got one, and I'm sorry to do this because I like him and he's your colleague at LBC, but Ian Dale deciding to run for election just 3 days later, ruling himself out.
Do you know what? I think he missed a bullet. So he's from Tunbridge.
Yeah.
And he has been quite rude about Tunbridge on LBC for many years. And surprise, 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 he got the nomination. The Conservatives were going to push ahead with him. And then the Liberal Democrats, his contenders there, pulled out all his anti-Tunbridge comments. Yeah. And, in short order, he decided that he wasn't going to stand for Tunbridge. Now, had he stood, of course,
very decisive,
he would almost certainly have lost to the Liberal Democrats. So I think deciding to stand aside was the right thing to do. And he remains a good colleague.
Can we say the people of Rochdale who were handed an absolutely poison chalice in their by-election in February, it was the 29th, wasn't it? They U-turned, they got rid of Galloway. I mean, who did...
The people of Rochdale U-turned away from George Galloway, one of the most charismatic, but also one of the most aggressive, poisonous, difficult political figures in this country. And it was won by Paul Waugh, who's one of the nicest. He was a former colleague of mine from the press gallery, the lobby of press journalists, and one of the nicest, most sort of self-effacing men you could ever meet. And I just thought that was a great victory for character.
Well, because you had this ridiculous situation, didn't you, where Labour and the Greens had to disown their official candidates in that
the whole thing's disaster, yeah.
The next one, dampest squib.
Well, that probably has to go to one of the losers in the Conservative leadership campaign. The person who I think had the worst day on the day was James Cleverly, because I think a lot of people, including, frankly, me, thought he was the obvious choice for the Conservatives. He was the most experienced candidate. He's funny, he's liked, and he's quite fast on his feet in the House of Commons. I think he would have made life much harder for Keir Starmer over big issues like tax, like the economy, like the farmers and all the rest of it than Kemi Badenoch has managed. And I think he really thought he was about to get it. He knew it was going to be close. But what happened was that some members of his team, as it were, thought it'd be a really, really clever idea to vote for somebody else to stop Kemi Badenoch. In other words, they switched at the last minute. And enough of them switched so that he lost in the end.
So less a damp squib, more a cock-up.
It was, yeah, you could say that. His slogan had been, "Don't be clever, clever, vote for cleverly." But they said, no, we prefer to be clever, clever. I think, whether it's a damp squid, it's
not very catchy, is it?
No.
No one really lost,
Damp squib for you?
I think one of the funniest moments of the campaign was as it was called and David Cameron was on his way to Albania and the government there had installed this huge poster of Lord Cameron to welcome his grand entrance to the country. And I think he was only there for 18 minutes or something. Then he had to fly on back home because Rishi Sunak had called the general election and he needed to speak to the cabinet. So I thought that was a perfect moment and symbol of the chaos in the government and the fact that, remember, Rishi didn't really have the backing from his whole cabinet for the general election. Many people were trying to tell him to wait, and it was sort of imposed on them by him.
And it wasn't just an enormous poster of David Cameron. It was like looking down the Mall or Regent Street at Christmas time.
It was quite North Korean, I think.
Yeah, the capital, the streets of the capital had Union Jacks going across the top. I mean, it was an unbelievable welcome awaited him had he made it.
He'll never get that back. He'll never get that back.
He'll never get that love back. I'm going to move on to another category: best political trolling. I'll kick us off with this one. Our viewers and listeners might not have seen this, but in some shameless publicity for his memoir, Boris Johnson makes this video on YouTube about who goes on the naughty list and who goes on the nice list, and he's making this. And he puts the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg.
Yes, it was very, very funny.
On the nice list for, of course, mistakenly, don't want to fuel the conspiracy theories, showing him the questions that she was about to ask him in the interview.
He'd just done Jeremy Clarkson.
Yeah.
And he went, and then there's Laura, so she was going to give me a typical vicious, nasty BBC-style interview. Naughty. But she kindly sent me all the questions first. Nice. And he put it in the nice list. Laura will be absolutely furious about that.
It was funny.
It was very
right,
funny.
Who's next? Freddie.
It's got to be Jeremy Corbyn standing as an independent against Labour. I thought that was... I mean, you've got to remember during the campaign there were so many of these independent candidates, there were so many left-wing candidates within the Labour Party who were trying to stand up against the Labour Party machine, against Morgan McSweeney's soldiers. And I remember being at Jeremy Corbyn's launch and it was slightly surreal. You got the usual crowds, elderly left-wing activists who have been there from the start, from the 60s, and they're never going to turn an offer to go and campaign on a Wednesday evening down. And it felt like a local campaign. It was a surreal moment because you've gone from Jeremy Corbyn, who was at one point about to usher in a new socialist utopia, and now he was just in a hall in his constituency begging for votes, which he did. He succeeded.
Successfully, yes. Yeah.
So I think that result would have wound up a lot of people in the Labour Party. Well, it did wind them up.
I think I'd like to mention Keir Starmer here because, he's very unpopular at the moment and he's had a very, very rough first few months as Prime Minister. But one area where I think he has been almost faultlessly in command is Prime Minister's questions, which we would not have expected. And there was a very, very luscious moment when Nigel Farage got up to have a real go at him over immigration. And Starmer just said, well, he was very, very glad to welcome the honourable member, one of his rare visits to this country. And then he went on various other things about Nigel Farage, and the entire place fell about. Nigel Farage himself was helpless with laughter.
Well, I'm glad to see the honourable member making a rare appearance back here in Britain. He spent so much time in America recently. I was half expecting to see him on the immigration statistics when we see the next batch.
It was a very, very good piece of parliamentary trolling.
Not to take away that positivity. But he has called Rishi Sunak quite a few
Prime
times
Minister.
Prime Minister.
He does keep calling
as
him
well.
Prime Minister, yes.
He's not done it to Kelly Bainlaw.
I found that quite endearing, to be honest.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I thought it was quite sweet. No, it was not very presumptuous of him to
Makes
to
him
do so.
fallible.
It
Cuddly.
does, yeah.
And on to our final category. Oh no, I hear you cry. Weirdest political moment, or just weirdest moment of 2024. Andrew, kick us off with this one.
So we've mentioned Boris Johnson once already on this show, but the Boris Johnson analysis of the obesity crisis facing the British is an absolute golden weirdo.
It's very strange.
So his argument was, so far as I can understand it, it was the fault of the Church of England. Why was it the fault of the Church of England? Because they had not been providing spiritual sustenance. They'd gone too woke. And if you don't have spiritual sustenance, you go straight for the donuts. So, and we all know this. You go into church and the vicar or the minister isn't quite compelling enough in the sermon, so you go straight outside to the nearest Greggs and stuff your fat face. This seems to me to be...
That seems like a sensible argument.
One of the weirdest arguments. Now, we've talked about Farage, we've talked about Boris Johnson. One of the things that I think we underrate is that the public, the electorate, are interested in people who say interesting, unexpected, and sometimes completely batshit things, as in this case.
Freddie, top that.
Well, I'm going to go for the very strange video of the independent MP Iqbal Mohammed defending, or at least calling for, in some form, cousin marriage in the UK.
The reason the practice is so common is that ordinary people see family intermarriage overall as something that is very positive.
That was a strange moment, I think, a turning point perhaps, and I think everyone online and from what I could tell in Parliament themselves was slightly taken aback. So that was strange.
It's not the beginning of a mass movement, is it?
Well, I don't know. Let's see, shall we? I hear the independents are trying to register a new party.
I am never one to miss an opportunity to bring up my friend Ed. So Ed Davey, I think a pretty weird moment was, let's pick the paddleboard, Lake Windermere, which is infamously filled with...
Effluent.
Ordures.
Which is why he went. But then choosing to fall off into said very dirty lake numerous times was quite odd.
I thought to do it once was mildly heroic. To do it 3 times was completely mad.
Self-indulgent.
He's a hard man, Freddie.
He is. What is the one thing on your bingo card for 2025, gentlemen?
I think what is likely to happen in 2025 is, given the number of rockets that Elon Musk is sending up to Mars, one is going to malfunction and probably fall on Clacton. That's my prediction.
Farage won't be there, so...
Well, he won't be there, exactly. So it'll all be fine.
I think we're going to see Keir Starmer at some point kiss the ring of Trump in a much more emphatic...
I beg your pardon.
I don't want to hear about that.
explicit way.
I think you need to expand on this.
This is I can't work. This is not a professional environment to work in. I think at some point Keir Starmer is going to have to cross the pond.
I'm just kidding. I'm crying.
I'm sorry. It's Christmas time.
Well, I think what will be really interesting is when Keir Starmer recognises that he's going to need to be much more effusive in the way that he brings Donald Trump onto his side. So I think he'll go over to the White House at some point and make that very clear.
This is going to be very undignified, but he has to do it because of the danger of tariffs to the UK and the importance of what Trump finally decides to do about Ukraine is going to dominate the year ahead. That's not a very festive note to end on, but it's the most important thing happening.
And we might see a Donald Trump-esque tweet mocking Keir Starmer as Justin Trudeau is currently experiencing, who Trump called the governor of Canada and suggested that Canada become the 51st state of the United States.
We can't end on that, so let me end on a positive bingo. Ed Davey, Christmas #1, with that classic, leaves the Commons, launches a pop career, takes the world by storm.
I think that'll be more fitting.